Okay, so I just wanted to just say a couple of words to briefly introduce that before letting Lorenza doing really the job of introducing the theme of this international seminar of GERPISA. Just saying that this seminar about this book that was published last year, if I'm not wrong, you would correct me, about working in Fiat Chrysler and now working in Stellantis, I guess, because we are moving up to a new merger between not only Chrysler and Fiat, but now with PSA. So that's all very interesting. And this book was we wanted to discuss this book 1 year ago, and we organized a seminar that was expected to take place at the IRES, the Institut des Relations Économiques Sociales in Paris. And everything was ready. We had already bought the tickets and booked the hotels, and then the COVID started and we had to call it off. And that's also it gives me the opportunity to apologize to my friends and colleagues in Italy, because I remember I tried to push them to come, saying, come on, it cannot be so serious. And of course I was terribly wrong, and they were absolutely right in highlighting that it was going to be difficult for them to come to Paris and to present their work, and they were absolutely right. So this has been in here and very difficult, strange and complex year, and 1 year later I'm very happy that we can have the seminar, but we are still in a digital format. So that's just the little history, the little story behind this seminar. Now I'll let Lorenza introduce the more serious themes and questions that are involved in this seminar, and then she will also introduce the speakers and more in detail the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommaso. I see that others are still joining, but anyways, let's start. So I will only take a few minutes now, and we will, of course, have a longer conversation at the end. Just let me, first of all, thank the speakers and all the attendees that are still joining. For being with us, for participating to this international GERPISA seminar. I can see that some of you are already GERPISA members. For those of you that joined and are joining because they saw the event advertised but are not too familiar with what GERPISA does and what GERPISA is. So as international research network on the auto industry, we gather researchers and industry representatives and the labor representatives, all revolving around the auto industry. We have a website that you can consult also for the upcoming events as part of this seminar series, but also we have a blog. We are present on social media. Sebastian, my colleague Sebastian, will give you exactly now the details of our social media pages are now in the chat. I don't know if anybody is tweeting, but we also have a Twitter handle. So even after the seminar, you are encouraged and invited to have a look at what we do. Shifting to what we are doing today. So first of all, it's an honor for me to introduce the speakers in this event. Not only I am also a researcher on the auto industry, but I have worked on workers' inquiries for quite a long time. And personally, my own research on the auto industry started with an inspiration from another project on Fiat Pomigliano in 2008 to 2010. Some of the attendees here probably were also involved. So thank you very much for being here, for being with us, and it's an honor to introduce you. So today we have 3 speakers, Daniele Di Nunzio from the Fondazione di Vittorio, Matteo Gaddi from the Fondazione Claudio Sabattini, and Angelo Moro from the Cesaer who is also a PhD candidate at the University of de Bourgogne. Each of you is like free to introduce yourselves again, to say more words. These three speakers speak on behalf of a wider research group, of a wider collective that was involved in this impressive research work that culminated in this volume, in this book, Lavorare in fabbrica oggi, an inquiry on working conditions at FCA CNH. The book came out last year. I don't know if people here already managed to get hold of it, but maybe the speakers can also tell us how to get hold of it, for example, if we are abroad. The book is a collective work conducted by the two mentioned foundations, so Fondazione Sabattini e di Vittorio, together with the FIOM CGIL, the Italian Metal Workers Federation. Is an impressive work not only for the wealth of details and facts that it provides and that our speakers will illustrate in further detail, but it's also an impressive work from a methodological point of view. And I'm sure that there will be questions also in this regard, because not only it revives a very important tool that was used by Italian workers a long time ago, that is still and certainly relevant today, but did so in covering a very wide scope. We are talking of a combination of over 160 interviews with a very wide questionnaire survey that managed to eventually cover up to 8,000 valid responses from workers in 54 plants, if I'm not wrong. You will tell us more. But all the sociologists and all those involved in field research will acknowledge that there is a very, very wide and significant scope for our research. So I'm sure colleagues will also be interested in the methodological implications of all this. I'm sure that there will be many questions given the information that you will give us on what you detected, on what you retrieved in terms of working conditions. The book in particular covers the impact in terms of work organization of the introduction of two main things. On one side, collective some transformations in the existing collective bargaining system and in the previous collective agreements. And on the other side, organizational and technical changes, especially the introduction of a new metric system, the ERGO-WAS system. So the book analyzes the impact and tells us about the impact of these changes from a worker's perspective. So we look forward to hearing more. We will have 3 presentations that together will cover about 1 hour. We agree that the speakers will try to stick to 20 minutes each, more or less. Then we will have a short break because being in front of the screen is tiring, about 10 minutes break. And then we will have a discussion with my colleague Sebastian Carbonell, who will conclude with some insights and will lead with some questions, with some initial questions, will lead the debate. Everyone is free to either book to raise the hand to speak, or to write the questions in the chat. We will read them. So either way is fine. And then, of course, there will be, I don't want to anticipate questions, but I'm sure that the conversation will also, as Tommaso was mentioning, will will cover also some recent implications and the connection of the presented research with some recent developments, in particular the foundation of Stellantis that we've seen is so recent. We're lucky that we're talking about this today. And the impact that will certainly have to be analyzed, the impact of COVID on working conditions in the same factories. So this will have to be seen. I leave it to you. And again, we will signal if you are like more or less about timings, and we will have a break. We will tell you. Thank you very much again. Again, please look at our social media if you're tweeting. And yes, this is it. Please, we start with Daniele, right?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for this invitation to the participants and member of the GRPISA network, and in particular to Lorenza Monaco and Tommaso Pardi. As Tommaso said before, this seminar was organized 1 year ago. Now we are in a deeply changed situation, considering the pandemic from the health point of view, but also considering the economical and production aspects, in particular in this key moment of the merger between Peugeot PSA and FCA group. We will listen the proposal of manager and shareholders about this merger, and but it is basic, essential to strengthen the role of trade unions in the debate and the workers' voice. And so this is a good opportunity to use the research finding to present a partial but deep workers' perspective about their working condition, as in the long history of this kind of inquiry survey in Italy, but also at international level, as Lorenza said in this opening intervention. So thanks. I will start to share the presentation. Okay. This presentation has all the research, but starting from this presentation is a collective work by the authors of the analysis of the quantitative findings of the survey by questionnaire. So I shared this presentation with Davide Bubbico and Giuliano Ferrucci. This presentation is organized in 3 parts. The first one is about methodology and sample. The second one about some findings on working condition and work organization. And the last topic is the workers' participation, a key topic in the industrial relations system, and in particular also in the work-class manufacturing quality management model. As Tommaso and Lorenzo said, recently we published a comprehensive book of this research project with the coordination of Francesco Garibaldo and Davide Bubbico. In the book there is also the contribution of the General National Secretary of the Trade Union CGIL, and in particular a full report focused on the main findings of the survey questionnaire is available online on the academia website. So starting from the methodology, obviously, as I said, this is a collective work, so I invite all the researchers and authors that I see also they are connected online, they are online with the seminar, to express their point of view and their contribution during the discussion. About the methodology, the duration of the research is 3 years. It started in 2000 2017, and Universe is the group of FCA, CNH, and Magneti Marelli in Italy. So this research is based at the national level in our context, and sure it is interesting to have the opportunity for an international comparison and debate as in this situation. We have, considering the universe, 62,000 employees, about 50,000 are metal workers in 54 plants. The research group is composed by CGIL, the Italian Federation of Metal Workers, Fondazione di Vittorio, and Fondazione Sabattini. We used qualitative and quantitative tools for the methodology, with about 160 in-depth interviews. This analysis, the content of these findings will be presented in particular by Matteo Gaddi and Angelo Moro in the following intervention. And my presentation is focused on the survey by questionnaires in 54 plants, with about 10,000 respondents and a final sample of about 8,000 questionnaires. I will try to present the findings showing you the distinction between the group FCA and CNH, so between the economic car and the automotive sector in a wide meaning and industrial equipment. Consistent with the gender profile of employees of the FCA and CNH groups, more than 80% of respondents were men. The average age is 45, and the sample has a low-medium level of education with the prevalence of permanent contracts. Considering that the research is supported by a specific trade union, CGIL, it is interesting to present the distribution by membership of the respondents. We have varied distributions by unions, considering the present situation as well as the past. We have the 22% of the sample that is member of CGIL, the 24% member of other unions, and 28% without a membership. Also, there is a quota of people that prefer to avoid to indicate this information. It has to be said that the unionization rate, so the membership according to the data reported above here, is higher than the generally membership estimated for the two group, that is around the 50%. I started to present the professional group of the sample. The variety here is quite extensive due to the number of plants involved in the survey, as well as of the activities and production of the groups. Line operators represent almost half of the respondents, followed by workers in supply activities, in the so-called preparation areas and logistic workers. Then we have plant operators and component shifting workers as forklift and transport drivers, and indirect production workers. Then there is a marginal quota of quality control staff, team leader, who are also has been involved, and other jobs generally. If we look to the distribution of professional group between FCA and CNH, we see that there is a greater presence of line workers among FCA. I start now to present the main findings about working conditions and work organization. Regarding the evaluation of working condition, we used several questions, you will see, but in particular a scoring scale from 1 to 10 with about 14 topics grouped as follows in 5 analytical dimensions. We have aspects related to the worker performance, aspects related to health and safety, aspects related to the work environment, and the other groups are economic and professional aspects and relational aspects. Workers given a score about their satisfaction from 1 to 10, and we can start to comment the quality of work from their point of view. The aspect considered most critical, with a score between 1 and 3, this is the red line. The aspects that are considered most critical for more than half of the sample are relationship with management and trade union intervention. So at the first places, we find the relation and industrial relation system. Considering the other critical aspects, great part of the workers, the greatest part of the workers give a negative evaluation to the professional classification, so about the level, to the toilets and changing room, and to generally to the working process organization. On the other hand, if we focus the attention on the most positive aspects, we can see a more positive evaluation about harmfulness of working environment, working time, and individual protective tool. However, also these factors are part of a general negative evaluation, and we will see later this consideration in the following analysis. What are the differences between professional group? The most negative evaluation comes from line workers, in particular with regard to workload and also trade union intervention, trade union activities. But also there are interesting specificities related to the professional group as the following. Workers in quality control expresses the highest number of negative evaluation regarding salary and professional classification. Plant drivers, a negative evaluation, a highest number of negative evaluation about the harmfulness of the working environment, indirect production workers on shift, worklift drivers and transporter on the risk of accidents, logistic preparation area express a more critical judgment on individual protective equipment. On the other hand, team leader give a less critical evaluation about the most part of the factors. The recent trend is towards a worsening of the working conditions. About 2 out of 3 workers, so the 60%, perceived a deterioration in working condition in the recent years. From workers' point of view, this deterioration, this worsening is linked to the work performance and work organization, in particular to the increase of the workload and work rates, as well as in general to a worse work organization. In particular, we analyzed the working condition in relation to the introduction of the world-class manufacturing system, so the total quality management system adopted from 2005 with a gradual extension in all the plants and an acceleration in this adoption in the most recent years. Focusing the attention of the analysis on the line workers, results show a general worsening of the working condition after the introduction of world-class manufacturing system for the greatest part of the sample, considering in particular the work-related stress, workload and working time, while the situation is slightly better, but better, we can say, for the ergonomics factors and for the work sessions. And about the situation of work, we can consider also at one side an intensification of work, on the other side the saturation of work. We have additional activities for 45% of the respondents, with a similar quote between the two groups, starting from the activities for the workstation cleaning, but also consider other activities as quality check, plant cleaning and maintenance, and other aspects. Usually, attention about working condition and work organization is about the intensification, saturation, and on the other side, the debate about innovation is focused on the general strategy or on the final products, particularly considering electric car, in example, or other aspects as autonomous drive and so on. But it is interesting also to analyze the innovation in the plants, starting from the tools, the daily work. As we can see, half of the sample use hand tools to reduce physical efforts. But the evaluation is not so good for the most part of the sample about the quality of these tools. As we can see, just 1 out of 5 said that tools are new and functioning, and about half of the sample said that tools are old and non-functioning. At the same time, we considered for the innovation, the daily innovation in the process, so the use information displays, the quality of this information, a key aspect of the total quality management system. And the digital information displays always work for about 1 out of 4 respondents. While on the contrary, for the other part, they doesn't work partially and so on. Considering the innovation, also the aspect of training related to the introduction of new production, the answers show that for a great part of at one side it is good for the 28% of the sample, but it is not good for about half of the sample. So what are the impacts of this work organization, intensification, saturation, and lack of innovation on the health and safety, starting from the accidents? The analysis show that in the last 3 years, 24% of the workers, so 1 out of 4, had an accident at work, and 4% during the last 3 years. But the most interesting information is that the injuries were reported only in 57% of the cases. And in our hypothesis, this is related to a bureaucratic and formal vision of the total quality management system, with a pressure to avoid the reporting of the accidents. Often these accidents at work are transformed into events of different nature, as sick day, holidays, commuting accidents, and other evidence. I go fast, but we can go in deep in the analysis during the discussion. Also, there is a great quota workers that go to the factory, medical infirmary, at least once a month, 1 out of 3 of the workers. And the same quote is of the workers that have a formally recognized reduced working capacity, with an impact on their professional profile and working activity. Finally, I want to go to focus the attention on the workers' participation. This is one of the most discussed topics in the analysis of total quality management system. So it is called the engagement, activation. We talk about participation of the workers. We use 2 analytical dimensions: the individual perception, so a personal evaluation about participation, and objective experiences about the opportunity to participate to meeting and to the proposal system. Starting from the individual evaluation, we can ask to the worker, is world-class manufacturing support the workers' involvement? And the answer is no at the end, because team leader doesn't support cooperation. World-class manufacturing doesn't favor support collaboration. Workers feel to have more importance only in less than the 30% of the cases, the respondents, and world-class manufacturing doesn't improve the problem solving process. This negative evaluation is expressed from more than half of the sample for all this dimension. Regarding the individual experiences, we analyze the participation to meeting, the submission of proposals, the opportunity to have answers to these proposals, and also the consideration of the workers' warning from the manager. As we can see from these findings, half of the sample proposed some changes or suggestion to the management, so workers participate to the proposal system. Half of the workers have this opportunity, but often, considering just the people who presented their proposals, only a few quote of them had an answer. The most part never had answered to their proposal, or just sometimes. Also, there is not the opportunity to participate to the meeting with the team leader, so there is a hierarchical interpretation of this role, and only the 15% of the workers received an answer for their warnings about the productive process. This is a key aspect of the production cycle. If there is a problem during the cycle, you can stop to work. You can express your evidence, your problems on the work. So we have produced an index of workers' participation, and the most part of the workers had few opportunity to participate as a result of this index. But also it is interesting to see if there is a positive or negative impacts on working condition for starting from the opportunity of participation. And our findings show that there is a positive correlation between workers' participation and more opportunity to have less negative working conditions. Also, there are differences among the workforce, work area, territory, and I want to show this about participation to say to you that all the findings I have presented are related to the general sample, but there are several differences with more difficulties for the line workers, not only considering the participation but also the working condition. As well as there are differences at territorial level and especially considering the working area. I suppose that it's better I finish this presentation to give space to the other interventions. So thanks.
Okay, many thanks. First of all, many thanks for this invitation. As mentioned before by Daniele, I will mainly focus about the so-called qualitative aspects of our research, because as described before by Daniele, one pillar of our research is the quantitative tool. I mean the use of questionnaire widespread among the workers of FCA plants. And the second pillar of our research is a qualitative tool. I mean the use of interviews, about 160 interviews with face-to-face with workers, to describe more in detail working condition within FCA plants and the so-called determinants affecting working condition within FCA plants. The qualitative part I will present today also involved also other colleagues, Matteo Rinaldini, Lisa Dorigatti, Stefano Valerio, and Giuliana Commisso. So we can say that overall, the key result of our research is that working condition within FCA plan sharply worsened with the application of the new organizational model, which basically entailed the strong compression of the operation time. I mean, the time assigned to workers to perform their operations. Second, a strong intensification of the pace and rhythm of work. Three, the increase in workloads for each workstation, for each workers. And finally, a net worsening of the saturations. Attention, saturation is a very crucial concept because the saturation is the ratio between the working time of the shift and within it, the time actually worked. So the higher the time actually worked, the higher the saturation. And overall, there was a clear deterioration in working condition compared to the phase before the application of both WCM, world-class manufacturing, and Ergo UAS. Attention, because world-class manufacturing basically derive from lean production model and is a system for organizing production to improve productivity via more exploitation of workers. Ergo is a checklist, is a tool to evaluate ergonomic risk for each workstation. And finally, UAS, Universal Analyzing System, is a MTM tool, method time measurement, a tool to define the work metric of the operation assigned to each workers, and is a predetermined working times system. But attention, because despite these three elements are distinct, WCM, organizational model, Ergo, check ergonomic list, UAS, work metric tools, they are distinct, but the integration between them is so strong that in the perception of workers, they are a very single system. So I talked about the determinants. Here, the list of the determinants affecting working condition within FCA plants. And you can see both organizational tool, production mix, method of works, collective agreement, job rotation, etc. And at the same time, technological tool, in particular, new devices, new automatization about production line, new digital tools, etc. But attention, because organizational and technological tools marched together. There is no distinction between them. Better, technological tools are used to support the full implementation of the organizational model imposed by FCA. In other words, Industry 4.0 technologies are used to the full implementation of the lean production model to improve productivity via more exploitation of the working conditions. Okay, we can see more in detail each of the determinants. First of all, an aspect related to industrial or social relation, the modification of the collective agreement. Because in the 71 trade union agreement introduced the concept of maximum individual saturation on assembly line. This is very crucial concept because this means that the maximum amount of work that can be assigned to each worker in a given period of time. And it is important to analyze each term of which it is composed. Maximum individual saturation. The agreement, in fact, established maximum, not average saturation. This means that for each product, worker cannot be assigned a higher load than the maximum one. But lower, yes. On the contrary, average saturation would be compatible with a higher load if then compensated by a lower one. For example, if a workstation can be saturated maximum at 80%, this means that it cannot be saturated first time at 85% and then at 75% to reach the average of 80%, but only at 80% or less. And second, so this is the concept of maximum saturation. And second is individual. That is for each worker. Also in this case is not an average because the work activity represents first of all an individual fact. Hence, the maximum saturation must be respected for each individual workers. And in this sense, you can see this, the term snapshot means cycle by cycle or product by product. And this is very important in presence of production mix, which we will see later, the importance of the production mix. Obviously, the situation changed dramatically with the new collective agreement, specific collective labor agreement imposed by Sergio Marchionne, because with the new collective agreement imposed by Marchionne, the before mentioned standard is totally removed. And in this way, the company is totally free to plan the daily production. And this goal must be reached with the maximum of flexibility. I mean, flexibility of working times, of workloads, of saturation, etc. Okay, this is the core of the organizational aspects of working condition within FCA plants, the Ergo UAS system. So basically integrates an ergonomic risk factor assessment tool, Ergo, with a work metric tool, UAS. And UAS in particular, Universal Analyzing System, is a system with predetermined operation times. I mean that for each single micro movement, an international table allocates the corresponding operation times. But what is micro movement? For example, to reach, to grasp, to grip, to place, to push, and summing up each individual operational time by using this international table, the total cycle time is obtained. In this way, the collective bargaining about operation time is very difficult, quite impossible for trade union. Also because the working cycle, I mean, the nature and the sum of the single tasks is defined only by the company, unilaterally by the company. Sure, it is possible to increase this operation time to defend worker condition with the so-called plus factor deriving from the ergonomic assessment. But attention, because MTM UAS system merges the elementary movement in more complex actions, reducing the number of operations. But attention, this reduction is only formal, not real. This means that workers perform the same number of actions, but the system calculates a lower number of them. For example, in order to estimate the frequencies, the former method, the OCRA method, calculated the technical actions, while the Ergo UAS only calculate the real action with a ratio 1:3 or 1:4 actions. In this way, the risk index assigned to each workstation can be lower. As a consequence, the ergonomic increase factor is lower, and as a consequence, the operation time assigned are shorter. The world-class manufacturing is lean production models. Moreover, identifies and eliminates the so-called not value-added activities. What means? The company, basically, a company, in this case FCA, classified all activities performed by an operator, and within them, identify the activities with value added and the activity with no value added, to reduce or to eliminate the latter. From the point of view of the company, in fact, not value-added activities are considered as downtimes, waste, or to use the Japanese language, muda, and therefore to be eliminated. But from the point of view of the workers, there is a very different point of view. From the point of view of the company, these activities are downtimes, waste, muda, to be eliminated. But from the point of view of the workers, these activities are a kind of micro breaks, to take a breath, to interrupt the cadence of the production assembly line, etc., etc. The technological aspect merged with organizational aspect. First of all, a car obviously is produced with the classical mechanized assembly line. As a consequence, the time available to each workstation to perform the assigned work is constant and equal to the cadence of the line. And in this way, you can see that production volumes and time assigned are fundamental to determine working condition. Second, Industry 4.0, the machinery used by workers, welding robots, machines, etc., work on the basis of incorporated programs that define the cycle times of each operation, the so-called machine times. In this way, the time assigned to workers is incorporated, is embedded in the technological tool, and for each worker basically is Unmodifiable is totally determined by the program embedded within machinery, within robot, within devices, etc. And also the so-called aid tools, mechanical, electronical, digital devices, etc., by guiding the performance of the operation and incorporated the cycle time can constrain working times, rhythm, pace, cadences, etc. Further, the digitalization and the connection of tools, the connectivity, I mean the core of Industry 4.0, allow to record the start and the end of each single operation in real time. In this way, they can operate as a powerful tool for controlling time, monitoring the progress of production, monitoring worker performance. This is the core of Industry 4.0, despite the rhetoric by companies about upskilling, reskilling of workers. This is the real core of Industry 4.0, to provide the companies for devices for control in continuous and in real time the worker performance. So computerization and digitalization also allow for a faster reconfiguration of production line and machinery. Also in this case, reducing the break time, the not value added activities, the breaks. And because in this way, the workflow must always be pooled. The concept of the tight flow of lean production model. Okay, the famous productive mix. What means this concept? Means that since different kind of vehicles are produced, the weight of the option and variance for each model is very high. As a consequence, this produce different weight in terms of workloads, in terms of worker performance. For example, if a car need less option, for example, a standard car, this require less work. But a car with more option, the so-called fully customized car, passenger car, etc., this require more work. This is the production mix. Daily on the assembly production line, the worker must produce different kind of vehicles, but this is important, within the same assigned time, despite the different weight of each product and despite the different weight of the workloads. To reduce the bad consequences for workers, a production schedule should include the calculation of the total time needed to produce all types of vehicle assigned to a shift, and the verification of its compatibility with all operational cards and related times, related saturation, related workloads, etc. And the second, and this is also important, a correct alternation between vehicles that need more work and less work. I mean, one vehicle with more work, one vehicle less work, one vehicle more work, one vehicle less work. But the poor management and the, how to say, the mindset of the market basically can lead to a huge increase of workload for workers on the same line. Logistic aspect. This is a very crucial point for each lean production model. Also, the new logistic organization affects labor condition, reducing downtimes or waste. First of all kind of materials, parts, components to be assembled, etc., are supplied directly to assembly line to prevent operator from wasting time, the so-called muda. Because if a worker search material, components, etc., basically is due and not value-added activities, and not value-added activities in the lean production mindset is to be total eliminated. And the plurality of delivery forms, deliver, electric trolley, automated guided vehicles, etc., often create difficulties for both logistics and line operation. Again, the lean production model prescribes the reduction of the warehouse to minimize costs. In this way, both external supply of material and the internal delivery to assembly line must be strongly integrated and synchronized. And often the workers have to face the poor functionality of tools and organizational model. So even not only the operation involved within production line, but even the logistic operator are under pressure to ensure that production line are continuously fed with synchronized and just-in-time supplies. This chart basically means the lack of the so-called job rotation, because to reduce the workers' effort, it would be necessary the practice of job rotation, in particular for the heavy ones, but it is difficult in the FCA, the job rotation, because on the one hand, we have a high number of workers with reduced working capacity, and on the other hand, we have a small number of light workstation. And second, the workstation are not always adequate to perform the job rotation for improving working condition, etc., etc. So if the job rotation is implemented within FCA plants, is implemented only about the need of the companies and not as a practice to enlarge, to improve, to develop workers' competencies. Also because to realize the job rotation, the company should provide operators with training, so that they can cover different workstations, and a trained worker, obviously, is versatile, and the company should recognize this from the economic point of view. We have also 5 minutes, and I will finish, I'm sorry. We have also the phenomenon of the staff reduction. What means? We observed a phenomenon of this type. On the one hand, the company has scientifically applied the system, organizational, technological, etc., aimed at reducing the workforce, and at the same time, the company scientifically introduced tools, organizational and technological, to intensify the performance. So the two aspects have marched together and support each other. The reduction of the workforce implies the increase of workload. On the other hand, the organizational and technological system increasing workload and saturation and make it possible to reduce employment. Again, before Daniele mentioned the unofficial definition of the task assigned to workers. So we have, this is just the case of the quality control and certifications activities. Because, for example, workers are forced to carry out further operation classified by a company as not value-added activity in addition to the production ones. And again, even the work card, the operational card is managed by team leader of hierarchy level in the shadow, because the operational card for each worker should explain the operation to be performed and the corresponding times. Obviously, it is an important tool to in the hand of workers to control workload, saturation, working condition, etc. but the operational card is often not available to operators at their station. And in this way, it is not possible to carry out a preventive check of the workload, saturation, etc. And even where the card is present, team leaders and other hierarchical figures can modify informally and unofficially the work card by inserting additional tasks. Finally, the time of the breaks, because the transition from individual sliding breaks to collective breaks, free from 10 minutes each, means that the place used for the breaks, bathroom, coffee machine, etc., are subject to crowding, and it makes difficult to enjoy the real interval. To conclude, a few words about the participation already mentioned in the presentation by Daniele Di Nunzio. We called this chart teams without teamwork because despite the rhetoric of FCA about the teams, worker participation, suggestion, etc., we highlighted basically the new team leader is not a pair figure, but is a new hierarchical figure. So in the response of worker, we have a scarce perception of a team-based cooperation, and also the suggestion system seen as very critical aspect. So the participation in FCA is a mere, how to say, it's a mere propaganda, is not a real condition perceived by workers within plants. Many thanks for your attention, and now.
Okay, I will make partial step aside in my presentation because I will focus on employee representation and union action in FCA CNH factories. But before starting, I would like to thank the Gerpisa team for their invitation, and also Matteo and Daniele for their presentation, which were deep and detailed. Before going into what has happened in the last decade in FCA CNH factories in Italy, in the context of employee representation, I would like to briefly go through a short history of workplace employee representation in Italy, because it will be useful to understand what has happened in our factories. In Italy, so this history starts with the conflict of the autumn of the 69 and 70s, which led to the introduction of a new system of employee representation, which was largely informal, which was based on factory council, formed by shop steward, directly elected by workers. Later on, the Italian parliament promulgated the main Italian labor law, the so-called worker statute, which reformed Italian labor law radically and adopted a system of employee representation called RSA, Rappresentanza Sindacali Aziendali. In English, we could translate with union firm representatives. RSA were appointed by trade unions, but at the time, so in the 70s, unions used to appoint in the RSA the same shop steward that had been informally elected by workers in the factory council. And thus, RSA tended to coincide with the factory council. Factory councils declined during the 80s, and at the beginning of the 90s, the union agreed to replace RSA with a new system called RSU, Unified Union Representative. And this new system, unlike the previous one, was and is also today formally both a trade union body and an employee representation body, since RSU representatives are elected by all employees on the union list. Consequently, RSU has a greater negotiating power compared to the RSA. For example, they can sign collective workplace agreements by the simple majority of their members. During the 90s and 2000, the RSU were gradually replaced, the RSA were gradually replaced by the RSU in most of large workplaces and factories because trade unions committed themselves to this general replacement of the employee representation body. And this was the case also for Fiat factories, at least until the 2010. As mentioned before, in 2011, 2010, 2011, Fiat management threatened to relocate to Poland some of the production which were done in Italy at the time, and in this way they obtained the consent of two of the main Italian unions, the CGIL and the WIL union, and also of a majority of Fiat employees in different referenda in three different factories in this period, to introduce a new plant agreement, which was outside the sectoral metalworking agreement. This plant agreement was later on extended to all the factories of the FCA group in Italy, and it introduced also, as we had said before, a working time flexibility and moreover a social peace clause in the industrial relations system. But by abandoning the multi-employer agreement, so the sectoral metalworking agreement, Fiat also withdrew from the agreement of 1993 on the reform of workplace union representation. And since Fiat was at the time bound solely by the law, that is the worker status that I mentioned before, the law only protected the unions that were signatories of collective agreements. And so FIOM, by refusing to sign the specific company agreement that Fiat had imposed, found itself expelled from FCA factories, despite being the largest trade union in the Fiat plants, but moreover in the whole of the metalworking sector. 2 years later, in 2013, the Italian Constitutional Court ruled on this issue, stating that this article of the Italian worker statute was unconstitutional. And so the Constitutional Court forced Fiat to recognize FIOM right to appoint a number of union representatives in every plant. So this was the story and also the legal battle behind this industrial relation issues. And as a consequence of all this, today, unlike what happens in the majority of large industrial companies in Italy, the employee representation bodies in FCA, CNH plants in Italy are the RSA. In recent years, FIOM has received several invitations by other unions to find an agreement to replace RSA with RSU, but as far as this would have implied for FIOM to practically accept the validity of the specific company agreement imposed by FCA, FIOM always refused to do this, and the last renewal of the specific company agreement dates back to March 2019, and in this case, as in the previous cases, negotiation for the renewal of the agreement took place separately between FCA and FIOM on one table and FCA and other unions on another table. So in the end, FIOM decided also on this occasion not to sign this company agreement. And we can say that today the cleavage between the signatory unions of the collective company agreement and non-signatory unions, such as FIOM, has a direct impact on union activity and shapes the system of employee representation in FCA factories in Italy. The system of employee representation in Fiat factories nowadays appears to be a dual, at least in the analysis of many experts in industrial relations, since the protection of trade union activity is differentiated according to the trade union to which representatives belong. So I quote here Berta, which is probably the most famous historian of Fiat, who says that negotiation nowadays in Fiat factory is based on a principle of reciprocity, which is triggered only if worker representatives adhere to the organizational principles of the new factory. If they don't, they are located outside the company system, even when they obtain, as in the case of FIOM, the recognition of the right to be present in the factory. So, as I said before, this system of employee representation appears today dual, because on the one side, representatives of trade unions who have signed the specific company agreement are elected in election, in which the rights to present the list is reserved only to these unions. They do participate in the system of joint committees in place in every productive site, and they are, moreover, they are granted an additional number of hours of paid time of union duties compared to that provided by the Italian law. On the other side, the unions that have not signed the company collective agreement, they can appoint a certain number of union representatives, but they cannot participate in the election organized by the other unions. They do not participate either in the system of joint committees, and in the end, they are only granted the amount of paid time of union duties provided by the Italian law, which is of 8 hours per month per union representative. And please note here that in the great majority of large industrial establishments, union representatives have, sectoral agreement have granted the union representative a number of time which is higher than the one provided by the law. So this is really an exception, at least for what concerns big workplace, large workplaces. The system of employee representation also includes the employee representatives for safety, the equivalent of the CHCST in France, and they are elected, those representatives are elected by all employees among the RSA members. Since the election of these employee representatives for safety is regulated by the law and not by the specific collective agreement, FIOM can participate in this election, and RLS are also not subject to the restriction such as those introduced for what concern RSA. And this is the first data that appears to be interesting. Recent RLS elections have shown that FIOM still has the support of a large quota of FCA CNH workers, approximately around 30%. So we can show it here in this two graph that when FIOM is included in the electoral process, the union is still able to win the support of a large quota of workers and to be the most voted union in the FCA factories. So we can agree, and most of experts in industrial relations agree that the adoption of this new collective agreement has changed the industrial relation system in place in the group, and it has shaped a new system in which collective bargaining and union representation appears to be strict or want to be strictly corporate. This new system appears also particularly suitable for supporting the introduction of organizational innovations such as world-class manufacturing. I quote here Cerruti, which is one of the other main experts in Italian industrial relations, who says that trade union participation in FCA factories in the world-class manufacturing models as applied in Fiat factories, trade union participation is not excluded, although it does not assume a strategic value for the company. And it must take place within the boundaries of an highly centralized and proceduralized systems, the system of joint commission, that assign to union only an informative and at most propositional text, but not co-decisional and not even, in fact, a negotiation on the work organization. And this appears to be true, especially for those union representatives belonging to the unions that have signed the specific company agreements, as it was found by previous research founded by one of this union, the CGIL union. And in the report of this research, we can read this sentence by one of the workers, which was interviewed, which gave an interview, who says that the role of union representative changed a lot with world-class manufacturing, and that it has become participatory and can provide added value to the factory, but within the limits of the application of the working class manufacturing pillars and method. So if this is what usually, let's say, RSA union representatives belonging to signatory unions do, what do film union representatives do in Fiat and CNH factories? We came up to this question despite the fact that industrial relations and trade union activity were not really issues which were specifically addressed in our survey, but it was inevitable for us, and moreover inevitable for the workers to which we spoke to address this question somehow in a spontaneous manner, especially in the concluding part of the interviews. Of the 167 interviews that we carried out, 54 concerned film union representative and 42 film union members. So people that were aware of the issues concerning industrial relations and wanted and thought of these issues as being central of their working condition in these factories. So we came up with a somehow post-hoc research question, which is asking ourselves which are the spaces for union actions for union representative of unions that not belong to the system in place, the system of industrial relation in place in the factories, in these factories, and in particular the joint commission systems, but still are not marginal. They are still central in terms of employee representation. And we came up also with a general observation that despite the fact of not belonging to a trade union who signed the specific collective agreement, this did not prevent a firm representative, particularly in factories with a stronger trade union tradition, to be able to intervene in relation to the consequences of the introduction of world-class manufacturing on working condition, and also to adapt, in some cases, practices of micro-conflict. As I mentioned before, some obstacles are really important for firm union representative, and they tend to limit their capacity of action in FCA factory today. We identified 4 of them. The first one, we already talked about it, but it's very important. It is the limited amount of time to be able to carry out their union activities in the factories. And this is an opinion which is very spread in our interviews, and this is the fact that having only 8 hours a month is not enough to do what union representatives want to do, and especially carry out activities concerning working condition. Also, other factors are important in this case. The first one is the introduction of team leaders who are seen by some workers and by some union representatives as potential competitors of union representatives, because they tend to being in a position in which they can address a workers' problem before union representatives. So this is a fear that many have among our interviewees. And then also the reduction of breaks has an impact on the union organization and union activity, because breaks were and are still commonly used for organizational purposes, and their reduction, of course, limit the possibility to exchange with workers and to organize union activity in the factory. Finally, an obstacle which is more related to the political climate in the FCA factories, which is the widespread perception that workers fear that the explicit request for a firm representative intervention could generate forms of retaliation by the company. This was something that we have found in, I think, the great majority of the interviews that we carried out in the different factories. Despite these obstacles, we found out that firm representatives, these obstacles have not been able to totally compromise the ability and the possibility for firm representative to use a certain negotiating capacity, and also to adopt practices, conflictual practices. On the one side, the exclusion from the joint committees did not prevent firm representative from intervening on the application of the world-class manufacturing, especially on issues relating to safety. We have some cases here, but I won't go into the details. But I will mainly cite the first one in the Sevelvan Disangro site, where firm representative made an explicit request for a work time assigned in advance in relation to self-maintenance activities, which is an issue specifically related to world-class manufacturing. And although the introduction of the new collective agreement had the explicit goal of eliminating a micro-conflict on the shop floor, a certain level of conflict has survived, has persisted, and in sporadic cases also with the involvement of representatives of other unions. The best known case is probably the one which involves the Maserati plant in Grugliasco, in which the proclamation of a strike in 2014 due to the adverse climatic condition within the workshop led Sergio Marchionne to rush back from the US to solve the situation in the factory. Finally, as said before, the FCA organization rate is estimated around 30%. FIOM has suffered a loss of members over the last decade, but appears to be currently in a phase of reversing the trend, particularly in newer sites such as Melfi. Which are the areas of FIOM representative intervention in these factories? We have to say that the activity of FIOM representative has faced not only with the constraints and difficulty posed by the new contractual framework, but also with the adoption of the new motion time system, the aforementioned ERGO UAS, and also with the increasingly frequent use of redundancy plan and temporary layoff. So the intervention of FIOM representative was confronted in many plants with problems such as the increase of workloads due to the incorrect management of the production mix, to the assignment to unsuitable workstation for workers with certified physical pathologies, the non-granting of short-time leaves, and the non-compliance with workplace safety regulation. But overall, the main area of intervention of FIOM representative appears to be the control of workloads and working time, and as a consequence of the introduction of the new motion time system, which is significant, especially in assembly workshop. Also in this area of intervention, some difficulties appears to condition the ability and the possibility of film representative to intervene on working condition. The first one was already mentioned by Matteo Gaddi, is the one of the consequences of the introduction of the new collective agreement, which has resulted in the visual elimination of the job description sheet that, even when available, are often incomplete or not updated. And also in some practices of obstructionism by the line managers, by supervisors, that often tend to prevent film representative to see and read the job description sheet with workers. And this is a sign of a more large and significant modification of the relation between line managers and union representative. Stated in many interviews, before the introduction of the new agreement, line managers used to negotiate modification the workload, modification the saturation with the union representative, and this is not the case since the introduction of the new agreement. Finally, something which is shared not only by union representatives, but also by not only by film representatives, but also by other union representatives, the increased complexity of the technical framework of work organization. I think that Matteo's presentation was sufficiently clear in explaining how difficult it is also for us to understand how this works, but this applies, of course, and moreover for union representatives that have to confront this, the technicalities of work organization today in FCA factories. Despite all this, film representative seems to claim the intervention on working condition, the intervention on work organization as their peculiar area of activity, with respect also to other union representatives, which in film representatives' opinion tend not to have an high interest in negotiating working condition and work organization. Besides that, film representatives also tend to claim different union practices in addressing working condition problems, because they claim that they want to address individual problems on workstation, trying to solve them durably and for everyone. On the contrary, unions, representatives belonging to other unions would only tend to exchange one worker to a workstation with another worker to another workstation without really addressing the problem concerning work organization. Finally, in some cases, film representatives tend to interpret in an extensive way the role of the role of safety representative to try to circumvent the constraints imposed by the collective agreement, and in this way try to negotiate work organization. This is an excerpt from a discussion group done at the CNH factory in Modena, in which workers and trade union representatives said that because they are not part of a union who signed the collective agreement, they have to try to find tricks to discuss and to negotiate work organization. And one of these tricks is to enter in negotiation through the issue of workplace safety. I have some conclusive remarks at this point. And the first one, I think it appears to be clear, is that despite an institutional adverse context, our survey has shown the persistence of film representative union activity, but we have to ask ourselves what made this possible. On the one side, of course, film has been able to mobilize a certain number of symbolic, organizational, and social resources. I will mention the recognition by workers, including members by other unions, of other unions of the expertise and negotiating skill of firm representatives, the increase also of individual investments in union militancy by firm representatives who try to carry out their union duties even outside their working hours during breaks or in other shifts to compensate the lack of time paid off union duties. And finally, also the persistence over time, despite the last decades, of strong relational networks built by firm representatives with workers in factories. But also on the other side, probably we have to address the issue of the practical impossibility of the dream of a factory without conflict and probably also without union. On the one side, as it has been shown by previous presentation, there is a widespread perception of the worsening or working condition following the implementation of world-class manufacturing, and this, of course, tend to strengthen the workers' discontent on their condition in the factories. Moreover, also team leaders, despite what has been feared by many union representatives, are not really able to completely replace and take the role of union representatives because, as many interviewees said to us, in the end, everybody does his job, and for team leaders, the job is to get work done. Finally, and this appears significant to me, we can talk about a certain persistence among trade union representatives, but also partially among workers and especially among older generation of a conception of trade union activity which is more inclined to negotiation among equals rather than participation in an often ancillary role as the one which appears to take place in the system of joint committees. So in the end, what are the future prospects for industrial relations in FCA CNH factory? First of all, we have to say that unions have long feared the spread of the practice of specific company agreements by other medium-large companies, but it has not been the case in Italy in the last 10 years. So Fiat tend to remain an isolated case of this point of view. And recently, we can also observe signs of relaxation of the relationship between the FIOM and FCA management. On one side, the elaboration of COVID prevention protocols in the last months to guarantee the resumption of production in different factories has seen FIOM playing a leading role in negotiation, and this role was also recognized by the company. And more recently, in this day, the new Stellantis CEO, Tavares, is currently visiting several Italian FCA plants. He has been today in Cassino, he was yesterday in Melfi, and on Tuesday in Mirafiori, and he has been meeting with all the union representatives, including FIOM representatives. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the prospects for trade unions from the creation of this new Stellantis group? Are they going towards a change in industrial relations system, towards a strengthening of the European Work Council, towards a greater union coordination at the European level? Those questions are open, but what is clear, what appears to be clear, is that the situation is moving, and that probably the system of industrial relations at workplace level in the next year would be quite different from the one that we have experienced in the last decade. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, all the three of you. Very interesting and rich presentations. Good also to conclude with some open questions that we can start from in the discussion.
Okay, anyway, thank you very much for your presentations, Angelo, Matteo, and Daniele. I have 3 sets of questions. The first is more of a methodological question. It's a thing we talked about at the last GRPSA seminar on GIL, where we remarked that we don't usually talk about methodological problems when we're doing inquiries on the auto sector. That was a case on Geely. That was a very also thorough experience on this new Chinese constructor. And so then I wanted to ask you more of how did you come up with this research and what were the different steps of this research? For example, was it a demand coming from the FIOM CGIL? As researchers, I'm sure you know that there are usually a lot of differences between what is demanded from a union, from a trade union in terms of research, and a difference with what we as researchers have as questions. It is something that happened to me during my PhD, where workers were asking me to study working conditions, but I was more interested in workers' representative and the new collective bargainings in PSA factories in France. So did you find any differences between what FIOM asked of you, what workers and union representatives asked of you, and what you could tell on working conditions? I had other questions on, for example, how did you administer the survey? You told also that many of the questionnaires were finally not used. Was it because people didn't know how to answer them, or was it just because you didn't know, because workers just didn't answer? Also, how did you manage to do the interviews with workers, with representatives? Did the interviews happen at the factory, at the union buildings? How did you negotiate even the interviews with workers? And did you do, for example, also observations in the plants on the usage of Ergo US WAS system on world-class manufacturing? And lastly, did you discuss or not working conditions with the management of FCA CNH? That was the first set of questions. The second set of questions came up with the fact that I did also a research more or less during the same period, a little bit before, on PSA in France, and also on a new collective contract that PSA negotiated and imposed in its factories in France. PSA negotiated, or at least presented, this new collective contract as a response to the economic crisis, to the consequences of the economic crisis of 2008 on PSA. As perhaps you remember, PSA was close to bankruptcy around 2011, 2012. So the firm told unions just as simply as this: either we negotiate a new collective bargaining, or we're going to have new factory closures and massive layoffs. This also happened during the context of the closing of the Aulnay-sous-Bois plant in the north of Paris, which was the last big factory of PSA in the Paris region, besides Poissy, but it's a little bit further. So the fear factor was determinant in the fact that many unions decided to sign the collective contract and change radically working conditions in PSA plants in France. Another similar aspect was that the fact that there was an important change in labor law in France that allowed PSA to negotiate and to conclude this kind of new collective contracts. And this change in labor law was a direct answer to the consequences of the 2008 economic crisis. The French government said that negotiations, that dialogue social, which means just industrial relations, need to be less on the level of the state, less on the level of the branch, less on the level of labor law, and closer to the factory. So PSA could negotiate a new system of working conditions at plant level, at the firm level, usually these new conditions being worse than what labor law allows them to be. So I found this similar aspect with the introduction of this new collective contract called CCSL that allowed world-class manufacturing, that allowed the introduction of Ergo UAS. So many similarities, I didn't know them, so thank you very much. Then my question is, because I have a question, is Angelo talked about it just a little bit, but what was the importance of the economic crisis of 2008 on the introduction of this CCL collective contract? How did how did management and the direction of FCA justify the need of this new collective contract? Was it because the firm was going also like PSA through difficult times, or was it, as in French industrial relations studies they call, more of an offensive restructuring? Offensive collective contract means that its goal is to obtain advance in front of the competitors. And lastly, the last question of my second set of questions is, what did allow FCA to impose this new collective contract? Was it the weakness of CGIL? Was it the fear, as in France, of externalizing the delocalization, outsourcing to other countries? I remember doing a lot of interviews with workers that said that they were afraid of what happened with the Aulnay-sous-Bois factory plant. That was a plant of 3,000 workers, and many of them were sent to other factories around the country. So they arrived to other plants in the country saying that their plant was being closed, etc. And then the last set of questions is more on Stellantis and the fusion with PSA. No later than today, I had an interview with a representative of the CFDT, who is one of the major unions in France, that said that the utilization of Italian factories is rather low regarding to the utilization of French factories, meaning that the Italian factories are not at full capacity. So for French factories, that would mean the loss of a part of their production to be transferred then to Italian factories. Have you heard something in that sense or not? What would be, for example, for you, the consequences of the fusion with Stellantis in terms of working conditions? Because if the utilization of Italian factories is rather low, she said only 40%, could it mean that there's going to be an increasing workload, which would mean in turn worsening of working conditions? So that is what I have to ask. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I just wanted to say that there are a lot of questions, so I think that you can answer, but please keep it brief, take in consideration that there will be much more questions coming, so you will have the chance to coming back to some points. So pick it up some stuff, answer in quite shortly, and then we go back to the room. Thank you.
Maybe I can start if my colleague agree. Okay, thanks. Because I want to focus the answer to some of the questions. And thanks for the reading of the main findings and these interesting questions and also suggestions to improve our interpretation of the findings. So I talk from my point of view. The main goal of this kind of survey that are supported by the trade unions are different. we have at least four main goals. The first one is to improve knowledge on a specific topic, like in this case, about the working condition, work organization in the FCA group. The second goal is to improve the opportunities for the workers to express their point of view. So the use of the survey as a deliberative tool inside the debate to consider the workers' point of view and their voice. The third factor, the third dimension of our methodological approach, especially used in Fondazione di Vittorio in all the survey we try to carry out on the world work, is to improve the individual reflection, the individual knowledge, awareness about their own working condition. If you try to answer to some questions, also to give an interpretation of your own conditions. This is basic to build a collective framework, a comprehensive culture of the working conditions inside the factory, inside also other working places. The last one is to support the building of network. So to use the survey to try to build bridge among the workers, among the researchers, among the trade unions. These four elements are part, from my point of view, because this is a collective research, so I try to express my point of view, is part of the long-term history of the inquiries and surveys in the history of trade unions, especially in the Italian context. It is the context I know better. And we try to give an interpretation of this methodology to propose new research in the present day. Starting from the last point, so the building of networks, because you asked about the role of trade unions and the relation between. So this kind of research are a relation, build a relation between several actors. So I say between researchers, other experts, workers, trade union representative at plant levels, and also trade union secretary. We try to have a big research group to listen all the point of view in the debate. So not only to act, but a large vision of these relations. In particular, this kind of research are based on two methodological perspectives. At one side, the co-research. So the co-research as the research as a collective project, as I said now. On the other side, the research as intervention. So what we want to have. The first goal of the trade unions, so talking about the goal of the intervention, was to knowledge about the working condition and working organization, to improve the awareness of each workers about his own working conditions, and also to give the opportunity to express their voice, because there is a lack of representation, as Angelo Moro explained before, inside the factory. This is relevant because in the debate often people so thanks a lot for this question, because usually researchers ask for the lack in the representativeness. Yes, if you want, I can talk a lot about these critical issues. But what is important, the reflection about workers' inquiry, workers' survey, is the differences between a representative sample of the universe with an probabilistic, system. This methodology offers a good representativeness of the universe, but on the other side put a selection of the sample. This kind of inquiry offer more critical aspects, lot of critical aspects about the representativeness of the sample. On the other side, there is no selection, so the tool is open to all the workers that want to express their point of view. I try to give a few answers, but deep. Quickly regarding the other points, the role of the introduction of the changes in work organization, also in the industrial relations system related to the reasons of these restructuring processes. I want to focus the attention on the point that from the 2008, as Juan Sebastian Carbonell observed, we had a crisis at global level, and also we had a long wave of global restructuring processes in the FCA Chrysler group, as well as in Peugeot, as well as in all the industrial economy. For our file, we started with the merger of FCA and Chrysler, and then we arrived to the present age. We go toward a standardization of a global organizing system that is functional to satisfy the need for a global government of the production system, as well as to satisfy the relation with global shareholders that want global guarantees about the functioning of the working system. So this is a wide perspective, considering the relation between Peugeot and FCA. We are in a starting step, but from my point of view, this is the perspective of the introduction of this kind of quality total management system. How the company justify this introduction? Certainly, considering the competitiveness at the competition global level, but also we have to consider that in Italy, the management govern also the information system with the property of the newspaper and other mass media tools. So govern the debate about the more efficient position in the global competition. On the other side, there is a weak role of the government to address the development of the factory, of the automotive sector, and at general level of the economic model, especially considering the green debate and the digitalization of the economy in Italy. So there is a weak role of the government to address this kind of process. I want to give space to others, so thanks for these questions, and also invite the other researcher present in this seminar that are part of this wide research group, starting from the coordinator, the coordination of Francesco Garibaldo and Davide Bico to give their point of view too also. Thanks.
So who wants to take the word and keep answering the questions?
Yeah, Tommaso, please.
Please.
Only a few remarks. Okay, first of all, FCA imposed the new organizational model stated by the new collective agreement by using a very blackmail. Marchionne not directly involved in the economic crisis, etc., but Marchionne directly used the follow blackmail. If you refuse the new organizational model, if you refuse the new collective agreement, it's easy. I will close your plant. Despite this blackmail, FIOM refused this blackmail and organized the protest of workers, so that Marchionne used a referendum to impose the new collective agreement. But thanks to the work of FIOM organizing the protest and the critical aspect expressed by workers, only a little more than 50% of workers voted yes at the referendum. I would say that, in particular, the majority of workers involved within production line voted no at the referendum, despite the blackmail to close the plant. And second, I know the position expressed by la CFDT in France, but I would stress that in Italy, FCA plants are mainly unused. I would say that the most part of workers in these years have a huge amount of hours of the so-called social shock absorbers, because the production volumes is so low that this production volume cannot allow to use the workers at full time. So they use a huge amount of social shock absorbers hours. So the most part of Italian plants are strongly unused. They are quite empty of models, of production volumes, etc. And I would stress another thing directly related to the merger between FCA and PSA, because the cooperation between FCA and PSA started before the official conclusion of the fusion, of the merge. And in particular, they stated to cooperate about the new 5 FCA model of the segment B, the junior Jeep, the new Y, etc. But they decided to allocate these production volumes, and we are talking about 400,000 of new vehicles in the Poland plant of Tichy, by using the low wage level of the workers in Poland, obviously. So I think that this is we are in front at political decision, often how to say, presented as economic crisis, social crisis, how to say, the clash between the companies, but in real the real reason is a political decision to make concurrence between the different working class of the different European countries. Competition, excuse me, concurrence is a French language, competition between the different. Okay, I shifted in French language, I'm sorry.
I'll try to add very shortly, very briefly, some elements of try to answer to Sebastian's question, which are very interesting and very important. I would agree with Matteo on the fact that the link between the economic crisis and the introduction of the new collective agreement is probably weak. There is a good paper published in French on Sociologie du Travail in 2015 by Guillaume Gorgu et Descenti, which reconstructs the referendum sequence in the FCA plans at the beginning of the 2010. And I tend to agree with their analysis. And they basically argue that fiat management, I mean, they argue that fiat management saw the opportunity to introduce some changes in how industrial relations were ruled in their factories in the political context of that time, which was the last Berlusconi government in 2009-2010, and also the demands by the European central banks to introduce reforms in the labor law and to liberalize labor market in Italy. And as a consequence of that, Berlusconi government approved a law that allowed to derogate in an unfavorable way from sectoral collective agreement, and FCA and fiat management tried to use this possibility in order to introduce the new collective agreement. And as Matteo said, the argument was that right now Fiat has become an international group, is no longer the Italian group. It was not longer the Italian group also at the time, but the tone of the public debate was now Fiat is a multinational, so it has plants everywhere in the world. The company has to feel free to invest where they can gain the most profit. And this is basically the basis of the blackmail operation that Matteo outlined before. But we have also to say that on the one side, it was a sign also of a change in the corporate culture of FCA with the introduction of a new management at the end of the 2000s, which was a strong difference with what was with the corporate culture of the past. But we have also to say that the road that Fiat took was not taken by other companies. And this is an important fact to stress because unions and the Italian employer organization, the Confindustria, in 2014 signed an agreement that stated that workplace agreements could derogate from the sectoral agreement only in the terms determined by the sectoral agreement. So they came up on a compromise on that, and Fiat refused that compromise. So this was also a moment in which contrast among contrast within the Italian employer organization and was clear between largest factories and medium and small enterprises who have a big role in Italian economic structure. But in the end, no any other big enterprise followed FCA on this path. So I would say that somehow now we are faced with a new situation in which probably Fiat management is trying to reconsider to come back within the Italian Employer Federation. We will see what will happen. And concerning your question on the probability of the localization of PSA production in Italy and the consequences of working condition, I think we have to stress one point, and it is that in our analysis, at least, working condition appears to be worse when the volume of production is lower, paradoxically, because then the problems related to the production mix that Matteo underlined are higher, because there are less workers in the factory that have to deal with different models, etc. So this is the point, the moment where working conditions are more difficult for workers. So it's a moment where there are fewer workers in the factory. Lots of them are home with temporary layoff, and increasing the volume of production. I'm not sure that will necessarily worsen working condition from this point of view.
Thank you very much. I don't know if anyone else wants to ask questions or even just react. I see Lorenza, who is going to speak. If the others want to ask questions, you can write them on the chat. You can also just ask them publicly if you want.
Okay.
I will have a question, but after Lorenza.
Thank you. So I have two questions mainly. So one is that both Daniele in his presentation and Matteo in his comments before mentioned this issue of permanent versus temporary workers. So I was wondering if you could say anything else on this, both for what concerns the time you conducted your research, so something more about the extent, how many, in what roles in particular temporary workers are used, what are the actual differences? Is there a difference only in pay, in working conditions? Is there a difference only that the temporary workers do not tend to be unionized? What are the substantial differences in terms of temporary versus permanent? And if you have any news, any extra information about any possible increasing use of temporary contracts during COVID, be on the top of what you already said. The other thing is, if I can build on the questions Seb asked and dig a bit more in the answer that Daniele gave before on core research and the workers' inquiry. So I was curious because I've been involved in several workers' inquiry experiences, some individually, some in team. So if you could say anything else about, one, the actual process. Did you take interviews together? How did you select the questions for the questionnaires together? How? Were workers involved besides FIOM, or how? Seb was also asking, how did you administer these questionnaires? Like, did workers have to fill the questionnaires on the moment, like you collected them later? These are technical questions that to us as researchers are interesting. And the other thing is, one thing that distinguishes a workers' inquiry from a simple sociological inquiry, as you are saying, is the political use of it. So did you have a chance after you published the book to present the work to the workers you had surveyed, or I mean, to have a feedback from those that were involved, okay, to understand also the possible use of an inquiry like this besides FIOM with the workers?
Perhaps, I don't know if it's perhaps we can collect some more questions, and I have some questions, but I would like to see if somebody else wants to ask questions and take the opportunity.
I didn't see anyone raising their hands. Do not hesitate, but I guess you can go now, Tommaso.
Okay, but please do not hesitate to ask questions. Is the purpose of this seminar really to give the opportunity to our speakers to answer many questions, to exchange with us. So first, I really want to emphasize how much is important this book and this survey, and also how much is unusual in present times. We do not see so many massive survey that really opens really open a kind of window in something that, from my perspective, has become a little bit opaque in the current media representation, which is the condition of the working class, or also simply the work. I mean, in Italy, for instance, we had a strong tradition of movies in the 60s and 70s where line workers would be represented, in which the heroes would be people working in factories. And this also existed in France or in UK. And right now, this is all gone. And I remember there is a book in France by, what's the name? I will remember later, but it's about the working class, and in this book, one of the author tells the story of how he asked to students in the high school, how many line workers, how many people working in factories do you think there are in France? And the students have no idea, and they think there are just few 100,000 maximum. And so there is something like an invisible word to outside the sociology of work. So my first question is, what have been the public reactions to this book? And has that changed a little bit the perception of this forgotten word, the word of industrial workers, the work of people working in line? Because my feeling is that this is something that media is not talking anymore. And is something that is really, people think that robots will just take over everything, and this is a topic of the past. Now, my second point is that I'm very happy also, happy is not perhaps the right word, but it makes me feel good as a researcher that your findings are very close to my own findings when I work on Japanese factories in Europe. For example, I found an internal survey of Toyota workers in the UK, and where they were asked if they would recommend their work to friends, and 80% of them said they wouldn't. And that highlights how much these people were not happy about their working conditions. And I found more or less the same connection between lean and long hours, high flexibility, problems in health and safety. And then whenever a crisis happens for a reason or another, you see absenteeism going up, turnover showing up, and then also quality and productivity problems. And I think that your inquiry in a more objective terms highlights exactly the same correlation between this way of organizing work and the consequences as are felt by the workers. And I have to highlight that the plants I was working on, even if they recognize at least two of them a union and the third didn't, were basically non-union plants. Union had no representative inside the plants. And also they had selected their workers outside industrial areas. So if you want here, there was no cultural resistance, because management scholars could say, yes, okay, perhaps what you're looking at is just the resistance of these old line workers to a new system, and part of the problem is that they are not fitting it. There is resistance to change, and I work in plants with these problems did not exist, and yet the consequences were exactly the same. So then I will get to what I think is an important question. So what are the conclusion of that? So do we use a Marxist perspective and we say that this is the most evolved forms of Taylorism and Fordism, connected is an efficient panopticon system that in a very efficient way extract value from the workers. So this standardized, digitalized company allows, as it was said before, a global governance by standards, allows to put all these workers, all these factories within the same group in competition one to each other. And so it breaks down also any form of solidarity, as has been emphasized, because it makes it extremely difficult for trade unions to to survive, even if we've seen with Angelo that they're still there because there are so many problems, but the system seems very efficient in doing that. So basically the only way to resist that is to go back to some kind of Marxist type of resistance. So it's to rebuild a working class type of solidarity. Or can we also look at that from a different perspective? And I would say that is the perspective that we've mostly used in GERPISA, which is the productive models perspective, if you want to express in that way, more kind of revolutionist, institutionalist approach, in which also you can see this factory are not very efficient place of work. There is no compromise of government. People have no willingness at all to work in this system. There is a minimal compliance. It seems fragile and rigid. You have shown that 30% of the workers have limited capacity. So that shows to what extent also the exploitation of these workers eventually produce, I would say, not optimal result from the management point of view. You talk about the fact that 70% of them, I think, say that the system does not help to solve problems. So the workers say it doesn't work. It makes actually the whole task of working in this environment harder, more difficult to do the quality, to do the standards, to take the pace. And I would say, linking back to the issues of temporary workers, that my view on that is that most of the viability of this system relies on the constant supply of young workers through temporary contracts and agency. And at least in France, I think this plays an important role in keeping the system working despite all this pressure and the fact that it breaks down the workers, literally. So depending on what you look at, I mean, so Marxist perspective, or rather more kind of a larger perspective of this is not only bad for work, but is also not efficient, the political coalition to deal with that could be different. And you could, for instance, when I talk with factory directors, surprisingly, they would rather agree on the fact that the system is not working well. And paradoxically, you could build some kind of alliance also with managerial levels that realize that the system is not really efficient. So this is about what kind of diagnosis you make and what kind of political solution you propose to get out of that. Sorry, a little bit long. Last point about industrial relation. So clearly, I think that the threat of relocation, also the decline of production in Fiat have been crucial elements in pushing this reorganization. And this is something that we have seen a lot in Europe, in particular amongst generalist car makers like Renault, PSA, Citroën, Fiat. They've all been gone through that. And I think that the role of Europe here is extremely important. So it's not only a matter of saying, well, European Working Council are not working very well, or we need to build European transnational solidarity, or no, it's really that the single market has produced that in many ways. And so it's extremely difficult to deal with that. And I think that despite the fact that I think we are all Europeanists here, I mean, we all defend the idea of Europe as a general value, there is a big problem with the way in which the single market works. And I think this is crucial in what is happening in these plants. And the fact that we have created, there's been, I don't know, 4 million cars capacity created in Central and Eastern European countries since 2005. And clearly this is just created to put in competition with factories in Italy, Spain, Belgium, Germany, or whatever. So I think this is a huge problem that we need to highlight. And clearly the prospect about Stellantis are extremely gloom from my perspective, because if the stock market has been happy about that, is because of the synergies that are announced. And synergies is just restructuring, general reduction of workers, increased intensifications, and more of that. So I think Stellantis is a very bad news for workers in both companies. It's not a good news. So that will be my comments and question. And thank you again very much for the book and for the presentation.
So I'm not an expert in automobile industry. My main area of study is e-commerce logistics. But I want to, I beg your pardon if my question could be, naive. First, thank you very much for this presentation to the speakers, and congratulations for this large survey and research. Very briefly, I would like to stop on some points that were partially raised by some of the conveners to this seminar. The first one is that I really appreciate, for instance, in Matteo presentation, the stress on the ideological nature of the Toyotist and teamwork and managerial management tools, and especially on the aspect of workers' participation. And reading also Davide Bubico chapter about industrial relations in the book, there is I was hit by the what caught my attention was the disappearance of workers' card established by the new CCSL. So this made the labor process much more smoky, so opaque, and so there is no transparency in a strong reduction of transparency according to the workers interviewed of the labor process. So we could see like that crystal tube of Bonazzi, it became a sort of smoky tube. So I don't know if you have a statement, or let's say if you want to go further in this on this aspect. And another point is the I also joined Tommaso in his comment about the regulation approach that could open some window on this study. And in this respect, I have a small perhaps critique on 2 points. The first one is that in the survey, as far as I saw, there is no special distinction among the different plants and the different societies and the different markets in which the plants for which the plants produce. So I think that Iveco is a different operates in a different market than civil autocar, mass autocar, and the same for Magneti Marelli. So maybe there is a certain, so everything in a certain, somehow collapsed in a mixed homogeneous, everything appears much more homogeneous than it is according to these different plants and different markets. And the other point is, as was also partially raised by Lorenza, about the labor market and the temporary workers. So I was very curious about, I mean, it seems that the study somehow overlooked or neglected the importance of internal and external labor market. So of course, relocation is the main threat, okay, that to the jobs, to workers employment security. But still, I'm wondering whether if you are envisioning further inquiry on this aspect of the dialectic between internal and external labor market. And so the process of recruitment, the role of temp workers. So just this. And then finally about the union role, Angelo said in his presentation that it's impossible ultimately for the management to replace the union function in the plant, because everyone does his job. But in the end, what is I mean, this is a very general question. What is the union job according to the in regard to the problem of economic viability of the plant, especially for a union like FIOM, who has a strong, a long tradition of antagonistic relations in the workplace. So, yes, we can discuss about this. Also, CGIL has a long tradition had a long tradition in the 70s. But how do they manage to? And this also concern the problem of the threat of relocation. How do they face the dilemma of working condition, employment security, and their job in the labor capital inherently antagonistic relations? Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for being too long.
Yeah, I just thank you. Thank you, Matteo, for your paper, for your presentation. I've commented on it at length in Sociologia in Italian, well, in English actually, because I don't write in Italian. I find writing in French difficult enough. But I thought it was a welcome. I thought it was really important contribution, and I only wish that earlier, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s, that there had been more coordination between union centres in Europe on the theme of lean production. There was a lot of, not a lot, but there was a degree of shop steward organisation, mostly in General Motors and Ford, and it didn't really touch Gerpisa, unfortunately, but it was part of the work that sometimes Elsie Chiron and myself and Jean-Pierre Durand had contributed to, and I know Tommaso had done a lot of work in Toyota in the UK and France. But I thought your contribution is really, really welcome. I wanted to say that I think what we know about lean production now is just a little comment, really. And I say I've made a comment on your contribution, which a number of Valeria wrote about. Valeria Pignano also made a comment about as well. But I think, you know, I think the bigger, it's not just obviously now lean good, lean bad. You know, we know it's all shit, it's all bad, but so is capitalism. And but I think one of the problems is that I've got a better idea of what lean production is about now, and it's really about, you know, it's really kind of central to the era of global turbulence we are in. I think it both contributes to global turbulence, and I think it's a product of global turbulence, and it's actually necessary. You know, if we start off from Gerpisa's original critique, as well as seeing lean, of course, we critique the whole idea of lean as it was constructed by the INVP, you know, going right back to Michel Fresnay's work, you know, the late Michel's work, and Robert Boyer and people. But it wasn't just about a technique of production. It was actually central to neoliberal revival, and I think we can see that, you know, whether we're talking about car assembly workers, white good workers, or people in the gig economy, you know, lean production is kind of inherently part of that world now. And it's almost like, you know, we can't really do very much about it. It's part of the patina of everyday life. I mean, look at what we're doing at the minute. I mean, it's great. I've just been to a funeral ceremony actually for a colleague who was Tommy Isrisson. He wasn't in Gerpisa, but he was involved with the Gerpisa work in Sweden at one time, you know. So you go from a funeral online to talking in a seminar online, and then we have to do our marking for our student assessments. And then we have, you know, and it's absolutely crazy, you know, what we're doing. So, okay, it's not lean good, lean bad, lean is shit. But it's part of the kind of, it is part of the patina of our life. It's part of the turbulent world we live in. And so maybe, I say this just between ourselves, the 21 of us who are here on Gerpisa, you know, maybe in a way forget about lean, you know. We still have the revolution, you know, we still have Paris, we still have Tokyo. And I think it's about controlling what management can do. And I think one of the things you do in the paper, which is important, is to actually talk about re-regulating the employment relationship, obviously Fiat Chrysler, but more widely, I think we need to be able to do that. And maybe turn around some of the techniques that management use, just as workers in a different era did with Ford's production strategies, and use those, try to, rather than just, you know, because we know from research, not only in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, but certainly in the United States and Britain, and Tommaso was involved in this as well, that, you know, where you just kind of say no, it never really works. Where you try and engage and change the agenda, that can be very productive. But also having control of the labor process is really vital. But one of the things you touch upon is about the local communities, and I think involving people, you know, beyond the labor process is really important in doing that in terms of local revival and in a sense saying, does it work? You know, how can this benefit workers? Not, well, it doesn't benefit workers, but how can a strategy to regulate management, you know, aggressive management policies change things? I mean, we have, where I'm working at the minute, we have this attempt to move from online to a sort of cross-online, cross-presential environment, and it's absolutely killing people, you know, it's really, really terrible. And we could call it lean production, or we could call it simply management by diktat. And that takes us back to some of the things that Charles Mayer and then later people like Carol Williams talked about, you know, some of these things we've seen before, but how do you control them in the current period we are in? And of course, so yeah, my point just to finish here is to say that lean is an ideological agenda, but it's really central to the current era of neoliberal turbulence. And you know, if we can control that in some way wherever we are, then we have to do it. You know, and I know in France it's probably easier to do it than having worked here now for 4 years. It's probably more realistic, you know, than it would be certainly in the British context, notwithstanding Brexit, which is obviously driven by deregulation of worker rights and all sorts of other things. But we won't talk about that now. But certainly through the Committee d'Entreprise and CSO, you know, there are contexts in which workers can control what management want to do, and sometimes they're quite weak and don't do it. But yeah, so I think lean is, you know, we know lean is bad, but it's, you know, we have to control, we have to regulate it in terms of every specific or sui generis employment relationship. Yeah, that's all. Thank you. Anyway, I'm sorry I was late. But...
No, thank you very much. We have a few minutes still, so I think the best would be for the speakers to respond to these many questions. So go ahead, the floor is yours.
So I'll try to start. Thanks for these interesting questions. And I'll try to start from macro to micro with a comprehensive answer. Starting from the direct question of Tommaso Pardi, I'm far from a Marxist perspective, interpretative way to analyze the world of work. I have many roots in my theoretical approach. One relevant root is in the sociology of action of Alain Touraine. I try to support complex vision of the world of work and of the conflicts and of the relations between production, individual life, and the collective life, so the social level. If you ask to reflect about the main questions and the main perspectives of action of our research, this is my point of view, because this is a wide research group with many theoretical approaches. However, talking from my point of view, we need to improve the reflection on the working condition, on the values and the rights of the workers. And when we talk about quality of production, we are talking about the quality of working life, the quality of individual life, as well as the quality of society. I don't want now to present my perspective in relation to GFPs network, but I think that is really relevant to understand the work of work in relation also to the general development of the society. From a point of view, the industrialization, the increase in the scientific management is part of the present trend of the modern economy. We have several ways to have a good or bad scientific model. We have a very, very bad scientific organization in the platform economy, in the riders, Glovo, Deliver, etc. We have a good scientific organization in the commons production of the software in some network of high skilled professionals. So scientific organization is part of the modernity, and we need to understand, if we talk about automotive, which kind of production we want, which kind of products, which kind of society. If you want, with a wide interpretation of the world, following the Lavorare perspective of the way for the future of the world. You asked a big reflection, and I try to give you a wide answer about this. And this is also related to the role of trade unions. What is the difference? If we start from this perspective, what is the difference between the trade union and the team leader at company level? Yes, there is a great difference, starting from the role of the unionist to improve the rights of the workers without the consideration of the competitiveness. There are fundamental rights, basic rights. We need to defend this level to organize the production. And we need also to improve the level of the rights. Then there are values. So which kind of production we want, which kind of society outside of the company where I am a unionist. And from this perspective, we have the unionists inside the Fiat FCA group that talk with, this is the Italian perspective of the trade unionists, that talk with the other unionists and other workers in other sectors. And if we stay inside this automotive sector, we have to improve the relation between workers and trade unionists of FCA groups and Peugeot PSA groups to understand which basic rights, which quality of products and society we want to develop. So from this perspective, we open to the debate of the working condition, to the debate on value, rights, and to the debate on the society. Going towards the other questions, so quickly, I can say that the use of temporary contract is especially focused on new production. For example, we have the use of agency workers for the new production in Melfi and in Cassino. So when Fiat start new production, we have an increase in the use of temporary contract. In my hypothesis is that it is used for sorts of a selection of the worker, considering their quality, but also their critical point of view about the system. But this is an interpretation without a real filed works or with a partial filed work. also there are other interesting questions about the difference between the work and trade union inside the company. It is obvious from the findings that the role of trade union, of the team worker is to improve the orientation of the company inside the working process, to improve the saturation, improve the intensification, to find a middle way with the interest of the workers. But in this perspective, we are not talking about basic rights, fundamental rights. We are talking about mediation, a synthesis with a powerful part at one side, a weak part on the other side, a synthesis between working condition and the need for production. This perspective is far from the trade union perspective. Yes, sure, there is a great diversity between the plants, areas, etc. I can say just that line workers have worse working condition, and that the worker in FCA have worse working condition compared to CNH. So we have worse working condition in the more economical cars than in the other. But we have several differences. And thanks a lot. I want to give space to other intervention. Thanks.
Okay. Very fast, because I think that it's too late. So many thanks for many suggestions, questions, etc. But unfortunately, I cannot answer to all the questions posed. I'm sorry. First of all, obviously, during the last 20-25 years, production volumes in the automotive sector, but not only in the automotive sector, shifted from Western to Eastern Europe. For example, Italy at the end of 80s produced about 2 million vehicles. Now Italy produces 500,000 vehicles. And at the same time, now, if we bring together Czech Republic and Slovakia, we can try about 2.5 million vehicles produced in these countries. Okay. Obviously, this situation push toward the adoption of new organizational and technological model of production by making in competition the different working classes of the different European countries. And I think that I know very well the papers and the books written by Paul Stewart, and many thanks, Paul, for your detailed comments on my paper. I think that if we compare organizational model in Italy, in France, in UK, but even in Central Eastern Europe, we can try the same organizational model inspired by lean production mindset and lean production tools. Even because a question can be, can we picking some elements, for example, suggestions, workers' participation from lean production model to reverse them to improve working condition? My personal answer is no. We cannot pick some elements from lean production model because they are strongly rooted in a single and organic model to exploit, to increase exploitation of the workers, to increase productivity, to increase company revenues, etc., etc. And I think that if the organizational model is the same in the different countries, each single national trade union cannot face front alone at this model. But we need a strong cooperation between European trade unions to face front collectively, not alone, at this model of production and of work organization. I would very quickly answer to two questions posed by Francesco Massimo. First of all, yes, team leaders or other hierarchical figures manage in the shadow the job description card or operational card, and this management in the shadow allow team leader, allow hierarchical figure to add further and further new operation to workers. For example, check, quality control, maintenance of tools, etc. Even to increase more and more productivity and to extract more plus value. And you mentioned it's right. You are right. You mentioned the different markets in which operates FCA, passenger cars, Iveco CNH, commercial vehicles, and Magneti Marelli parts and components. We highlighted the common elements of the working condition of this different situation. But attention, Magneti Marelli produce parts and components, and this company was sold 2 years ago at a Japanese company, Calsonic Kansei, so is shifted outside the board of the FCA group. But Magneti Marelli producing parts and components is completely involved in the just-in-time logic, because if Magneti Marelli must supply an engine, a powertrain components, a lightning component, etc., to an assembly line within assembly plants, these components must be supplied just in time when this component must be assembled in the final product. So also also the chain of parts and components is full involved in the just-in-time model. Finally, to answer at the suggestion of Tommaso, I can answer for me, obviously. Yes, I am Marxist, and I use Marxist tool in our research, also because I would provide useful tool for the class struggle. I would provide to trade unions useful tool to negotiate, to do initiative, to act in defense of the working class. And in this way, I would stress, and I finish, the issue of the plus value extraction. This is a clear example of the increased extraction of relative plus value, because during the same shift, in this way, companies can produce more final product. I mean, during the same shift, the same number of workers can produce an increased volumes of final goods, and in this way, via exploitation of workers, companies can extract a more volume of plus value. This is a clear example of the concept of relative plus value. Many thanks for all suggestions, questions, etc.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Tommaso, you would like to say just one last word before.
Perhaps Angelo wants to say something.
Just a very quick reply. I just wanted to add my very brief from my point of view. I would start from one of Francesco's suggestions to try to answer to him and to Tommaso in particular. So Francesco, you spoke about, you remember this metaphor of the crystal tube. So the labor process that would have become transparent. But the problem is, for who does the labor process, production process become transparent? So it is true, as you said, that the fact that job sheets are not visible to workers can somehow obscure to them, and it can to take back from them some instrument to analyze their own workstation, so to somehow gain conscience on what are their working condition. But the problem is that all these, as probably the let's say the goal of the FCA management was not to let the labor process become transparent for workers, but become transparent for managers. So the labor process is crystal from the point of view of the managers, not from the point of view of the workers. So from that perspective, the question is that the case? So how much knowledge have managers gained on the production process from the workers? And this knowledge in those kind of participatory systems are supposed to be transferred by workers somehow autonomously in the participation, as kind of participation to management. From this point of view, I think that we should be looking at this question some years from now. So I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, because, and now I try to answer to Tommaso. What is interesting to me, I was remembering an interview I had with young workers, is that, and this is where the question of the continuous supplies of young workers becomes central. So many of the new generations of workers who entered in the FCA factories in the last 10 years, most of them clearly entered to permanent contract, but some of them temporary contract, but some of them became permanent. So they entered somehow, some of them at least, they entered at the FCA factory with the idea that the world-class manufacturing had some promises, had made them some promises, and that participation would lead them to improve their condition within the factory. As this has not been the case, some of these young workers have become more and more, let's say, distant from participation tools. And of course, I was referring to this interview with this work. He was some years older than me, and it was clearly saying, I've been making suggestions for years. Now I take this knowledge for myself. And this fact of, I'm not sharing more all of this now, I'm taking this knowledge for myself. And this fact of preserving a space of workers' knowledge on the labor process is central for the action of a union representative. And also it was one of the main characteristics of the industrial working class of the Fordist, of the Fordist area. From that point of view is really, I mean, one of the objectives of union representative, particularly union representative, appears to be to involve, really try to involve workers in the analysis of their own situation and share these no more with company management, but with union representatives. And this is probably something that should be noticed and acknowledged also in the idea of what trade unions should do within this factory. Are they have to care about the viability, the economic viability of the factory or not? I think this is an issue on which we have seen a kind of dualization, but only appearing somehow in the FCA factory, which was structured mainly by the institutional configuration, so with the film outside the industrial relation system. I do not agree with you. Sure, film has a strong oppositional tradition, but as always, I mean, as often demonstrated the ability to negotiate working condition, to be present and on the table on which work organization is decided. But this is not the case with this is not the purpose of the actual system of industrial relation in FCA. So the problem is that I don't think that there is with film a problem in not considering the problem of the economic viability of the factory. It's just that the system in which industrial relation is shaped does not allow a contribution by the union to this problem because they are not seen as equal partners of negotiation.
Thank you very much. I don't know, you want to
I think
something? Yes,
we should do this way. There are people that would like still to ask questions, but at the same time, it's really late. So this is a room that we can keep it open. So I'm still recording for the purpose of putting that online. So anybody, for me, I can say thank you to everybody. I think that was a great presentation, some great discussion, important themes, and I really appreciate the exchange that we had. So I would say that this is over, but at the same time, if you want to stay and keep an informal conversation with whoever wants to keep raising questions, I will not stop you from doing that.